Good day, good day, good day. What's up, good people? And welcome to another episode of the Leader Set Trends podcast with yours truly, Aisha Thomas. And I have another guest today, you all. I'm really excited. I call her Miss Words. This young woman was someone that I met when Clubhouse was popping over the pandemic. For some of you all who are still on it, you all know, right? And some of you all who aren't on Clubhouse anymore, you all know at one time Clubhouse was just where everyone was. It was a great platform for individuals from all over to connect. And me and this individual, right, Miss Words, we had this commonality on emotional intelligence. So we will find ourselves in these rooms having this topic. And as you filter through some of the people who aren't like really about this life, and what I mean is, really about the impact, really about it. It's not like something that, maybe they'll touch here and there, but really are deep dived into that topic, that area of expertise. She was one of those individuals. So I'm super excited to bring this conversation that her and I had about EQ in specific communities, the African-American community, me being West African and how that showed up there, and also the benefits of how it will impact the household. Again, we talk about leadership in the household, but how will it impact the household will ultimately benefit individuals as they go out and lead in organizations and businesses and on teams and so on. So I'm super honored. I'm so glad to finally put out this episode. So as always, grab your notepads, your note-taking material, get dialed in, because the information that you get is really, again, it's about that intrinsic development. So it's going to be able to reach and connect to all areas of leadership in your life, from you leading yourself, you leading at home, you leading in an organization, a business, and a company, and you, again, leading as far as impacting the future generation. So get those notepads, I can't even talk because I'm so excited. So get your notepads, your note-taking materials, and let's get into today's message. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Leader Set Trends. And I'm so excited. Okay. And I'm really excited because this lady, this woman, this queen mother. Okay. I'm being extra right now, but I'm super excited to have this guest that I call Miss Words. Okay. I call her Miss Words because we connected in a very unique way during the pandemic on an app called Clubhouse. But this connection is related to emotional intelligence. But let me read her bio, okay? But Aleasa Words, she's been in the emotional intelligence and DE&I strategist space for about 8 years. She's a senior advisor and executive coach to new leaders, startups, and nonprofits and small businesses. She's internationally certified in emotional intelligence, a coach, speaker, who also provides expertise in organizational dynamics, right? A psychology, diversity, inclusion, belonging, leadership, conflict resolution, impostor syndrome that you guys have heard a few times on this podcast, and trauma-informed approaches. So I'm so excited to have you on, Miss Words. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Applause, applause. How are you?
Listen, I'm great. When I found out I was going to be on this, and because it was you, of all people, it was you. It was like, absolutely, stop the presses, clear the calendar, let's do this. Because honestly, there are so many people that I have had the opportunity to interact with over the years, people I've met through social media. But I have to tell you that you are truly, and I'm not saying it's just because I'm on the show, you are truly one of my favorite people, because you live it, you breathe it. You're authentic, you're curious, and you're willing to share the stage with the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And vice versa. Like I mentioned, we met on an app called Clubhouse, right? Some of you all might have heard of it before. And the beautiful thing is, like, during the pandemic, this allowed people to get connected and network and have these rooms and have these conversations. And I saw these conversations about EQ, and I met this amazing young woman talking about the same things that I'm passionate about, talking about EQ as far as as leadership, team development, EQ, and how it's needed in the African American community and Black and Brown community, it was amazing. And just from there, we continue to connect. So we want to have that conversation with you all today. We want to talk about emotional intelligence, why it's important, why emotions. I've been saying to you all, we need to normalize emotions, right? Because for a lot of us, especially those that are in leadership positions, when you think emotions, you're already like red flag, red flag. Emotions don't belong in leadership. Not realizing emotions actually, they are pretty much like they're the foundation of our actions. They are foundational in everything that we do. It's happening regardless of your thoughts, your ideas. You try to push them away, they're happening all the time. So this conversation to me is so personal, because I think, again, we need to normalize it. We need to make sure that we are identifying it correctly, and we want to ensure that we are, as leaders, developing that area effectively so we can show up effectively for our team members, and supporting them as they are navigating emotions as well. So, but before we kick it off, I want to ask you, kick it off with this question as far as leadership. When you think about leadership, what does leadership mean to you, Miss Words?
To me, leadership means that you have reached this place in your life where you know that you are ready to be able to inspire and to guide people on a forward path. In organizations, it's for a goal for the organization, but in life, it's for this forward path to be able to be on this journey to move forward and to grow and develop. And leadership, true leadership, it really happens when a person is willing to do so with curiosity, with patience, with self-awareness, and the ability to be nimble and resilient.
Yes, I love it. I love it. That self-awareness piece is so important. As we speak about self-awareness, I always share the story about, the lack of awareness I had as a leader. I always talk about the level of autopilot that we walk in on a day-to-day basis. We learned all these principles about leadership and we show up and we're not really living day-to-day aware of how our behaviors, how our emotions are basically affecting our day to day, how it's impacting our teams. And that self awareness piece is so important. And the more that we are functioning in our awareness, it will really improve how we show up as leaders. So, as we're talking about emotions and EQ and the importance of that, tell us your emotion story, your EQ story. How did you get from, okay, my EQ is low, right? And okay, I need to work on developing it. What did that look like for you?
One thing about me, people know I am one of the most transparent people that you could ever even imagine. And sometimes people are like, whoa, you said that? You told that about yourself? And I think that it took such growth to get to that point, to be able to tell some of the stories. There was a time in my life when I was really having a lot of challenges on a personal level. And I got to this point where it was a milestone birthday and I woke up and life was a mess. And it was, you can decide to continue to walk in this mess, or you can decide to do something about it. And I was always thinking that there had to be something more. So I started to really think about this coaching thing and kind of getting involved with coaching. And when I did, one of the first things I was asked was, what discipline would you like to have if you're thinking about being a coach? I didn't know. And as I started reading and learning more and more about emotional intelligence and became so like just impressed by what Daniel Goleman did and Peter Salovey, all the people, the founders of the fathers of emotional intelligence, I thought, that's it. That is it. That is the thing that was missing in my own life. That if I was a person who was practicing this, if I understood the competencies that were behind this, things might be so different for me in my own life. And not only do I want this for me, but I want this for everybody around me, including my kids, and being able to leave a legacy for my children. Because I think with each generation, we have to get better and we make these choices. So my kids, they're kind of like, EI'd a lot, but they're better people for it in the long run. So that's my story.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's so interesting because again, I'm fully transparent I've been super transparent on this podcast because it's so interesting. I did a training earlier with my, with my organization and every organization within our headquarters today, which is thousands of people. And I always like to connect um, everyone's leadership stories to their bubbles, their first teachers, their first leaders, their communities, basically your worldview and how you were raised to see the world. And the reality is, when it comes to EQ, emotional intelligence, and you talk about how you're raising your children and embedding that within them so they can go out in the world and already have the skills and the tools necessary to be, leaders that already have a higher EQ. It's so important. And I just think about myself, that, emotions, again, it wasn't normalized. It was something that, again, it just, I think society and it's been, it has such a bad name that the way emotions were managed and taught was from a frame of those three: happy, sad, and angry. That's it. Right. And even in this book that I'm reading by Brene Brown, she mentioned that, just from studies that have been done, it seems like that is the only main three emotions that we know of. Even when you think about, hey, leave a review, you walking out those restaurants or those places and they have those things that you can tap, or the restrooms at the airport, they have those faces. They have the smiley face, the face that's like, and then the sad face, right? And a lot of us have learned emotions from that perspective. So when you're trying to connect an emotion, right, to something, you're only, thinking or describing it from one perspective, not realizing that there's so many ranges of it. When you're navigating or trying to communicate how you're feeling, right, what you're navigating right now, you're like, I'm angry, but really you're disappointed. Maybe you're frustrated. There's so many different things that are happening. And you're saying one word, but really you are feeling something else. So it's like your soul is like, I know you're saying sad right now, but it's more. I don't know what it is. So, as far as you identify that I need to make sure that I am embedding this within my children. What do you think it's important? Why do you think it's important that leaders also are aware of, their upbringing and, how that shapes how they see the world and their EQ? Because again, you also have this dynamic with like Gen Zers that are more aware. I think Gen Zers, their EQ are a lot higher than you think about, I actually labeled them like this: the generation of the now and the generation of the future, because essentially that future generation will be the leaders of those organizations. But the generation of the now is like, I don't like the generation of the future. They're this and they're that. And they're so much more aware. They talk about their emotions. They talk about how they feel. And the generation of the now is like, don't bring that up in here. I need you to execute. And I know I said a lot, but what is your perspective on, the dynamics of maybe the generations, or the importance of being aware of how we saw emotions and working on, even in our adulthood, learning and growing and normalizing emotions? Because I always talk about leadership is not solely from an organizational standpoint, but it's also self-leadership, leading in the home, while also leading in a position or role.
So there's a lot of things I can think of when it comes to this. You know, uh, Old school told us to leave our emotions at the door when we came to work, right? Leave your emotions at the door, which when you think about that, it just doesn't make any sense, even from a logical perspective, because that's actually part of you, right? So when these emotions happen, there are these actual chemical reactions that happen in the body where these neural hormones actually fire off, and within 6 seconds, these things are triggering something going on in your body. So how do you leave that? And what people were doing instead was stuffing those emotions. But the thing is, they never went anywhere. They just manifested in some other way, oftentimes in anger and fear, and then people, having behaviors that were unhealthy ways of expressing those emotions. So I think that for leaders today, what they have to simply understand is that there's no reason to be afraid of your emotions. Your emotions are just simply messages from you to you. That's it. That's all they are. When you become angry, that's telling you, you know what, something's blocking my way. Something's in the way of me doing something. So I've got to be able to get through this. I've got to be able to either walk over top of it, walk around it, or walk through it if I can do so in a healthy way. The same thing, when you're afraid, right? Something that you care about is at risk. It could be yourself, it could be something in the workplace, it could be your reputation, it could be your family, it could be anything. So when you start to make the emotions messages, when you realize they're messages, you actually kind of take that icky feeling that makes your brain feel uncomfortable out of them. So I would say for leaders today, when they're dealing with people, they've got to learn how to be comfortable with themselves and give themselves permission to actually be different than they ever were before. And to know that you don't lose your authority, you don't lose your power by allowing yourself to be authentic and to be vulnerable. Because, see, the thing about it, when I said about transparency, you mentioned it, I mentioned it. And one of the reasons that I'm transparent is because if I tell you something about me, there's nothing you can do to hurt me with that. But if you find out something about me, you might kind of get me from the left or to the right, and then you might kind of, little surprise me a little bit. So I can be transparent because I'm comfortable and I'm confident in what I'm living and what I'm dealing with. I'm healed, right? And many of us are not healed. But the only way for you to get healed is to identify what was damaged in the first place in your emotional self. It goes back to our childhood, and that's okay. But people have to realize that we're all triggered all the time. And I love what you said about Gen Zs. I've got a Gen Zer at home. And let me tell you what, this young lady is all about energy, honey. She is all about energy, and she will not engage in things that are going to bring her to a place where she might step out of character for herself, because she cares more about her own self-awareness than she does, getting caught up in a reaction cycle.
I love it. I love it. I love what you said. Your emotions are messages from you to you. Oh, that's so good. Right? Leaders, write that down. And that's powerful. That's so, so powerful. And again, these are conversations that we don't want to have in the workplace, or we realize. And again, we need to normalize the fact that, again, I keep on saying normalize, but we are still human beings. There are individuals that are entering your organization that have navigated trauma, that are just learning about boundaries in the workplace, that are being triggered because they've navigated trauma. And that's reality. There might be something that you have said, maybe something that's happened that they don't even know unconsciously has triggered something that happened to them when they were small, or something that happened to them in a professional or personal relationship. As a military member, you hear about PTSD because you have individuals who have experienced wartime related trauma, but you have individuals who have navigated all kinds of different trauma, because post-traumatic stress disorder can be correlated to a multitude of things. And I've mentioned it before on one of the episodes that they're also researching PCSD, post-COVID stress disorder, because there's a level of anxiety and stress that people are navigating now because of COVID. So again, you have team members now that are, hey, it's time to go back into the workplace, and they're stressed. They're navigating anxiety. Again, your emotions are messages from you to you. So they're like navigating, they're probably tricked. They hear somebody cough in the next cubicle. Someone could be literally like stressed out about it. Oh my goodness, I don't even know if their safety plan is effective. Now you're seeing that it's affecting their behavior. Now their productivity looks different because the person next door has been coughing all day, and now they can't even execute effectively the emails they're sending out today. Bob, did you realize that email you sent out like 5 minutes ago is missing all the attachments? Right. And you sent out another, 2 emails after that, and they were missing this. What's going on? And you don't even realize Bob is triggered because he's stressed out because of, again, so-and-so next door is coffee, and they're worried. So we have to realize that there are individuals that we are working next to that are that are functioning from a space of they're triggered. They're not aware that this is happening. They don't have necessarily the self-management tools in place to know how to navigate these feelings that are having, which I call feelings are physical manifestations of your emotions. Because when I feel, right, the emotion of sadness, right, I am one of those individuals that might cry, right? And that's the physical manifestation because the nervous system starts to work. And now a tear comes. For someone else, sadness might look like anger, right? Or what people think is anger, but that's really sadness, right? So again, that's why it's so important that we start to get an understanding of what emotions are, how it looks like for different people, because when I get upset, I cry and people are like, are you sad? No, I'm actually upset right now. Right. But we have correlated the physical manifestation feelings, what you're seeing with certain emotions. And, they'll coin certain terms to that. And it's like, no, I'm actually feeling the emotion of this. No, I'm seeing that I'm feeling this. And I need you
Right.
to understand this is what I'm feeling. Don't label it something else. So what is your perspective on that? I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the incorrect labeling of
Uh-huh.
emotions and so on. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and that's that area of emotional literacy, right? So there's literacy in everything. And one of the key components when you think about that self-awareness perspective is, where are you from an emotional literacy standpoint? Can you actually name your emotions? Because most people are not able to. We talked about those basic ones that people kind of pick, and it's if I'm angry, was I frustrated, was I annoyed, what were the things that led up to me feeling anger? Because then if that's not even dealt with, are you going to go to rage, right? So they're all within that whole paradigm of that. And it's the same thing with the other basic emotions that we have. There are a lot of ways that we can begin to identify that. When you identify the emotion, you can then diffuse some of the dysregulation that it actually causes in you in the first place. And that's another thing that leaders have to think about when they are working with people in the workplace. A lot of people are coming back into the workplace extremely dysregulated now. And when they're dysregulated, they literally cannot function at their optimal level. At dysregulation, the language center in the brain actually is impacted. And I don't know if you've ever remember like a little kid when they're really crying and they're really upset and something's really going crazy with them. And you go, what's wrong with you? And they go, I don't know. Or they don't say anything because they literally don't have the words. And that doesn't mean that they can't happen to us as adults. So when these people get into the workplace and these things are happening and they don't have anything to say about a situation at that moment, maybe they're dysregulated. But if you're not in tune with it and having this awareness of others, how are you going to manage that? You're going to get caught in that reaction cycle instead of responding effectively when you're having these conversations with people. So it's really important to know where you stand, but also to think about where other people stand. And one other thing I want to mention real quick, there's a report called the State of the Heart Report. And the State of the Heart Report kind of measured how emotional intelligence competencies may have changed over this last 2 years with COVID. And the one thing that was consistent in that report is that decision-making skills have plummeted in so many areas. And that is one of the key factors that you can work on in emotional intelligence. So as a leader, if we know that decision-making skills are impacted, how does that affect the productivity of your organization and the effectiveness of your teams?
That's so good. Oh, that's so good. I talk about this thing, tunnel vision, when our emotions, again, that regulation is off, just consider it like having tunnel vision, and again, when we are making decision, we want to have as much like clarity. Again, like just imagine if you're in the car, you can see, like you can turn to the left, you can turn to the right, you can see so much in front of you. But just imagine if all you have access to is what's in front of you and you're trying to move over to the right, trying to move over to the left, but you can't. Like, how do you do it? It's pretty much like you're literally like moving over to the next lane blind. And just imagine making decisions like that, making decisions blind. And you think that you're making the right decisions, but you're like, okay, I think I'm making the right decision, but you're functioning from a capacity that is limited because you are, again, that regulation is off. So that's why it's so important. And I love that emotional literacy, being able to name your emotion, having that clarity, and recognizing that, again, we need to normalize this, because the more that we normalize it, the more that we take time to develop and work on these areas, the more you are able to get the tools that you need in order for you to regulate and find the tools to, okay, I'm triggered, I'm stressed, I'm getting in that tunnel vision mode. All right, let me go take a walk. Let me take these steps that I have worked on and get on the other side of this before I go and start making decisions. Because again, the goal is to try to make the best decisions possible with as much sight as possible, as much sight as possible. So I love that. I wanted to take a minute, and I know this conversation is real good, but for you, let's find out specifically where you land in the EQ category, where you land in these areas, so you can identify those blind spots, find out what those strengths are, those gifts are. Really look at those specific areas within yourself that will really help you in getting on track to get to the next level that you're aiming for. So make sure you reach out to me, info at aishathomas.org, aishathomas.org, or you can just go to my website, aishathomas.org, and learn more. Select that area where you want to get a consultation. We'll connect, talk about it, and we'll take it from there. So I'll talk to you guys soon, and let's get back to the episode. So I want to ask you real quick. So the trauma-informed part, why is that trauma-informed piece important as well when we're talking about EQ, emotional intelligence, and how we're, again, navigating this as well? Because again, that's another thing, like, oh my goodness, what are they bringing all these terms, trauma and the workplace and leadership? What do you mean?
Right. That's not our problem to deal with that in the workplace, but it is your problem to deal with that in the workplace. So I love to do examples, right? I'm the analogy person, kind of, because it kind of brings things in. A lot of people have had opportunity to be in a workplace with someone who just worked their nerves. And maybe they don't know why they don't like that person, or they don't know why that person works their nerves, but there is something about that person that irks them, that gets them upset, that makes them, their flesh start to rise up and makes them just kind of feel that ick on the inside, right? And oftentimes when that happens, it's because you've experienced something that person is emitting in another part of your life. It may have been with your family of origin. It may have been something with a controlling parent. It may have been something that happened in a neighborhood that you were in. There's something about that person, that situation, or the interaction there that actually causes a trauma reenactment within you. And that's why it's important for us to begin to think about, this trauma in the workplace. If you have people that, a lot of times you'll see it. Sometimes you'll see salespeople who they're just barreling over top of everybody, but they're really good at sales, but they're barreling over top of everybody, and they might not have the skills to really have the conversations and really communicate with people. And, it's like, wow, why would they treat people like that? But they might have something else going on inside of them too, where they're not able to balance those things. So being trauma informed is really going to give you an opportunity to be able to see some things a little bit differently than you would have if you weren't trauma informed. You'll notice when people are dysregulated. So maybe that's not the time for you to go to that person and dump another project on them, because they're not seeming quite right now. And because a lot of times these interactions that you get with really good employees can be circumvented if you really think about the timing, the place, the person, and what's going on. And that's what being trauma informed actually will help you with in the workplace.
Yeah. And again, and it's not asking leaders to become like therapists or psychologists, because again, you hear these terms and it's like, whoa, is this going too far? But again, it's just the realities of being aware of what's going on. Again, you have mental health has been a big topic of conversation, and it is important. And we, in these leadership positions, we just have to be aware of these things, of what's going on with our team members. That's why I always talk about building building relationships and connecting. We can't just we can't lead from the office. You have to get there and connect and see what's going on with individuals. And the more that you are trauma informed, the more that you start to work on your EQ and also learning from the perspective of others. Now you start to say, okay, I noticed certain things. Okay, I'm noticing this, I'm noticing that. And now you're getting on the other side of, okay, I need to engage in a certain way. And of course, there might be cases where you need to get the support of HR. It might be one of those things like the Air Force has a term called ACEs, right? Ask, Care, and Escort. And those are cases where, we have recognized that we've seen a shift in behavior. And, as someone that is a master resiliency trainer, I've also done, I'm assist certified. So as far as a suicide interventionist, they'll say straight up, like, are you suicidal, right? Because you might have seen the signs and you just ask. And Ask, Care, Escort really is that a piece where, okay, you ask the question, care, meaning now I'm going to, walk you along this journey and we're going to go to that point of contact. And I'm going to escort you there and do that warm handoff so you can get that support that you need and allow those professionals to take it from there. So again, it's so important to know and be aware of, who to connect with, and get with your HR team beforehand and connect with them and say, okay, if this does happen with my team, who do I connect them with? Who do I call? How do I ensure that my team knows who they can reach out to as well? Because the reality is that especially during this time, there are people that are navigating a lot of different things. So we want to just be aware and we can give them the support that they need, which also builds trust, allows your team members to see that you care. And it just aids in really that connectivity that I've been labeling as, it's empathy, but I call it empathetic leadership. The more that we show that we care and we connect with our team members, it'll really bring another level of connectivity and cohesion within that workplace. So now just to pivot a little bit, because, we were having a conversation before we got started, but I want to talk a little bit about EI and EQ, right? EI, EQ, you hear both of the terms, but as far as diversity, or specifically how, the space of how we need it in the African-American community, as far as how it needs to be connected or imparted within the Black and Brown community a bit more, because I know that this is something that I'm passionate about, and ensuring that within those communities and within those, populations, that conversation is happening more. Because again, the reality is you have a lot of individuals that go into organizations and they already have to navigate diversity related issues, discriminations, microaggressions, right? It might be impostor syndrome, which tends to affect those within the Black and Brown community more often, because again, they're already maybe walking into a culture that is already biased, which unfortunately fuels that imposter syndrome. Like, how did I get here? Am I just here for a diversity initiative? Am I really qualified? And so it just fuels that. And you already have society and all these other systems that unfortunately fuel these ideas, that now it is affecting their emotions and their day to day. So, we also have to realize how emotions are affecting those within your organizations that might be that group, that minority group within your organization as well. So in your mind, and from your perspective, why do you think that, or what is your insight on the need for DE&I? So let's call it DE&I and EQ, that merge.
So there are a lot of people that are starting to realize that this is an issue. And, if you notice, like when people do these DEI programs, oftentimes these programs are what I call FaceTime programs, right? You just get to show your face and it's over and that's it, right? The checklist, I took this, I got the certificate, I go back to work and everything's the same. The only way in order for you to actually have sustainable change when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion programs is that there has to be a change within the people who are actually attending these programs. And how that change actually transpires is when you actually factor in the emotional intelligence component of it, because they've got to become self-aware. How do you go through unconscious bias training and actually have something from that stick, right? when you're not self-aware, because you leave that and you're not even paying attention. Oh yeah, this thing said I've got bias towards, heavier people. It's a sizeism issue. It's I've got bias towards whatever. Well, you walk right out the door and it's the same thing, because there's been no shift in you. So we have to be able to infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion into EI programs, and we also have to do the same with EI programs being infused into that as well. That's the only way that they're going to work on a regular basis. But I will say one thing that's really interesting that people don't even realize. In Black and Brown communities, we actually have a far better grasp of emotional intelligence, some of the competencies, than people actually realize. There are some competencies that we may have to work on a little more, like maybe applying consequential thinking or something like that. But think about it this way: we code switch all the time. That's EI, right? You know where you're really aware of your situation at that moment. When you go into the store and you're being profiled, you use your EI, because you now have to assess that situation. You have to assess what's happening with that person and yourself. So we are far more skilled at using emotional intelligence than we thought we were in our community. We didn't know to name it, but there are certain competencies within that where we could stand to get some more strengths. And then there would be more growth in that space overall if we were able to do that.
Oh, that's good. And for those who don't know what code switching is, it's basically when you have to adapt your behavior based on the situation that you're in, and I guess when we utilize code switch in, the Black and Brown community, African American community, is really like, it's like you have to switch up, right? There are times where you're like, okay, I know that I'm going to an interview. It might be predominantly, the space might be predominantly, Caucasian. So, your that twang in your voice might change, and you might get a little bit more what they call proper, because unfortunately, the idea or the reality is that, and please, again, we know studies have shown that these unconscious bias, they fuel a lot of individuals, and you will be judged by your name. You'll be judged by how you speak, how you dress. So there is this whole cloak of a person that you have to put on before you walk in the door, right? And Aisha becomes hello, how are you today?
Right.
And it's like a whole new person turns on, because again, it's pretty much like you're prepped to, hey, everyone might have a bias, and you want to put your best foot forward. And again, by doing that on a regular basis, or being in a space where you might be the only, or you might be the sum, or the couple, it can cause a lot of stress. And I love that aspect that you talked about awareness. Every time I go and do DE&I training, and I explain, again, I always talk about, okay, DE&I or unconscious bias. I always talk about, again, our worldview, what shaped our view of the world, how our bubbles could impact and does impact how we see the world and see other people. Now you go into the big world, and you've never encountered an African American in person. Again, as a military member, I have been in basic training, and people have been like, you are the first Black person I've ever been. I've been overseas, and they've been like, man, I've never seen a Black woman before. And I've heard that I've heard stories where, oh, I've heard that, this one person said that they were told that, they had tails, and they're like, where's your tail? And they were really asking a authentic question, and they meant nothing by it. Nothing at all. And they truly learned this. And now they're going into the big world, and they're asking these questions, which could be, some people might think that's a microaggression, right? Like, what, and your bias is just coming out. But again, it's just a lack of education. And as you're going into these spaces and you're not aware that, okay, my worldview was shaped this way, I need to get re-educated in a sense. And now I know that I'm unpacking my unconscious bias, but my unconscious bias might come out. I need to be aware of that and make sure that I am functioning, or as I'm re-educating myself, that I'm aware of that. So when I'm navigating these spaces, that I am handling myself effectively. So connecting EQ, EI to DE and I is so important. So when I get to that side of, okay, now let's talk about the tools. We've talked about what shaped your worldview, how it can impact you in the world. Now it can connect to, bias language, to microaggressions. Okay, how can we unpack that? All right, let's talk about self-awareness, self-management, right?
Well,
Let's talk
I
about
was
how,
gonna say, I was
yeah,
gonna
no,
say
yeah,
to
go
you
ahead.
that. No, I'm sorry. I was gonna say to you,
Oh, no, no, go ahead.
that ignorance is the largest profession that's unpaid. It's the largest profession in the world, right? Because everyone can identify with being ignorant to something at some time or the other. And it's kind of like that job that you really don't want, but we all have sometimes. So, if we actually begin to change our skill set, then maybe we won't have that as one of the biggest professions in the world, being ignorant to the things that happen with other people, and then to your point about, with the code switching, there's that African American vernacular is what we call it, right? And, there's a certain way that, people speak. And I think one of the things that is difficult sometimes for people to understand is that although Black people have been in America for so long, it does not mean that we don't have a separate culture, right? Just like other people have various cultures, cultural norms that they have in their homes, at their family of origins, things of that nature. And I think that people kind of think that because a certain group of people have been in a certain space for so long, that everyone is kind of generally assimilated to a certain way of behavior. And just, the diversity part of that tells us that we have to remember that diversity is not just about race and orientation and gender, but it's also about diversity of thought. So culturally speaking, we're all going to have different ways of even thinking too.
That's good. I mean, I've even expanded the conversation about that on diversity generational, right? And understanding that there's some generational bias. It just expands in so many different ways, but I love that diversity in thought, right? And it's going to be important that we get out of that ignorance pocket and really start to learn more because again, you have again a generation that is fueled and they're looking for organizations and companies that are again have that diversity in thought, that are really about that corporate social responsibility. They're embedding this mindset, and it's not, again, like you said, it's not just for show. They're living it. They're seeing the diversity in leadership. They're seeing it in how they're functioning, and that's why you're seeing such a high turnover, because how this generation was shaped, they are the most diverse. They're sitting next to all these different individuals from backgrounds, and they're going into this organization and they're just like, wait, what's going on? I'm in this pocket. You aren't, you aren't supporting me in a certain way. And it's a turnoff for them. So it's so important that I always tell companies and organizations, if you want to be that organization that's long lasting, recognize that your future clients and your future leaders are requiring this. So you want to start to have this, be more open-minded to bring these topics in, to start working towards it. And it's difficult because, again, there was like this one-track mind. But as we are talking about innovation, you have to have innovation of thought, mind, and practices as well. So let's not talk about tools, right? Let's talk about tools. I'm big on leaving tools for leaders and, some things they can start working on now as they're like, okay, I get it. I get it now. All right. I get it now, Ms. Word. I get it now, Aisha. Now, what are some things they can start working on now towards maybe, a few tips? So, all right, I need to get this EQ in my life. What are some practices, some simple things they can start to do?
One of the first things that they can do is to be honest with themselves. Be honest with yourself about who you are, where you are, what you know, what you don't know. We don't know everything, right? Honesty with you is going to get you on the path forward. And then once you do that, identify some of the areas where you know that you might have some gaps in your EQ competencies. And the way to do that is to do some of the things that you and I do, Aisha, whether it's a DISC profile or whether it's a say development report, which is one of the things that I do. When I work with my clients, I have an opportunity to create a dashboard for teams so that I can actually bring in all of the EQ scoring assessment information from that team into one dashboard. And you can see where your team is deficient in certain areas so that you need to grow certain things. So some of those tools, getting those assessments in place, whoever you're working with, whether you're working with Aisha on what you do, right? You've got assessment tools that are available to you. Other people have assessment tools, and read. There's a lot of great information that's out there. And also begin to start thinking about things. There's lots of mastermind groups out there. There are mastermind groups for every culture, every dynamic, every leadership level, every entry level, position. Begin to start surrounding yourself by people who are interested in growing themselves in these competencies. So those are some of the tools you can have. Get yourself a coach, get yourself a consultant. Be able, if you're a leader and you're a new leader, get some training. A lot of times people focus on just the organization giving you the training. You've got to invest in yourself. And when you invest in yourself, they can't keep that. You take that with you wherever you go. So you've got to be able to be willing to do that.
I want to I wish I had the sound effects. I might have to add that before we post this, because that's so good. And that's such a reality. Because, again, while a lot of organizations believe that leadership development is important, not a lot of them have invested in it. They don't have like ongoing training on it. They might not see that that's the focus. Or again, you also have to realize that because of the pandemic and because of with a lot of shifts, a lot of companies their pockets have been hit a lot. So, their allocation of funds might go elsewhere because of that situation. So I love what you highlighted, invest in yourself as well, because regardless of where you go, you take you with you. So if you're investing in yourself, then you are continuously developing. My emotional intelligence growth did not happen with investment dollars by my organization. It's something that I invested in myself. My therapy that I decided to do, I did it on myself. I went and invested on it in myself. And the continuous growth, I would have to say that is funded by the United States Air Force. Thank you. Well, my investment in them, they support my education. But again, that is so true. You take you with you everywhere you go. And the beautiful thing is, everyone listening here, this now again connects to every other thing that you're connected with, right? It's connected. It's now going to impact your family. It's going to benefit, these community groups that you're a part of. If you're doing other volunteer things at church, maybe you're supporting some type of sports group. Now you're seeing the world a lot different. Isn't it interesting how you start seeing the world different when your EQ goes up? You're like, I know I know right now I'm seeing this person's EQ is, and they don't even realize, or they're aware of what they're saying. I see the world so different, which allows me to have more empathy when I connect with my team. I have conversation. And when I have this team member, I call her my second in command. And when I'm talking to her, it's like, I like our connection, or how I'm talking to her is so from like the heart, because I see things from a different perspective. It's not like, oh, well, this is what's happening because of this. It's really from a different perspective versus, the old me that, did it from the book. And this is how we do things in the military, and so on. So you just have to realize how this just benefits you in so many different ways. So thank you so much for sharing that. And as we close, I just want to ask some last few questions, to close, as far as, how leadership has transformed you specifically. So what did the worstest, okay, I'll add to that, the worst leader, what did they teach you?
So I had this leader one time, and she was just, you had to say good morning. You had to ask her about her life. You had to come in. You had to do this, that, and the other. You had to make coffee. I didn't know how to make coffee. I didn't even drink coffee. And I remember this woman was just on me because I was kind of like, I was raised to keep my personal business outside of work and just be professional at the job. And this lady just hounded me and hounded me. And she even wrote me up and said that I wasn't a team player. This is so long ago. And I just remember being so angry that I wasn't a team player because I didn't ask you about your weekend. And, and in that situation, what I learned was that just because someone is in a leadership role does not mean that they have the capacity to lead, and that they don't necessarily know what it takes to actually lead people. And we can't put people on this pedestal, because at the end of the day, They're still human. And just like I needed to grow, this lady needed to grow as well. So I had to learn that because you should know better. She didn't. And over time, over the years, I kind of checked in on her career later. She got better.
That's good. I love that. I always say again, leaders aren't born. There's skills that need to be developed. There's some individuals, if you decide to get into the role of a leader, you have to realize there's some things you have to work on. EQ, we hit that hard today. That's an area you need to work on. And recognize that, things like, not someone checking on how your weekend was. This is not a ding on, their performance, and that's just crazy to me. It's crazy, but again, it
It
is a
happens.
reality that I know. Isn't it crazy? I always say again, my motto is individuals don't typically quit the organization, they typically quit the leader. And I was listening to this Twitter, I forgot what they call it, the little chat that they do, but there were this person said that people tend to quit people, and it's true. A lot of people transition from organizations because it was the people. They're like, I don't like the people, but the reality
I quit
is
that leader.
quit that leader. But yeah, I mean, just because someone is sitting in a leadership position does not mean they are an effective leader. So thank you for sharing that. All right, next question. What did the best leader teach you?
Oh my gosh. So let me tell you, I share this story all the time. I was working in an organization and I just didn't feel like the organization was investing in me the way that I wanted to, even though my leader was great. But of course, he only had so many things within his ability that he could do, like, so many things under his authority. And I just said, I just don't feel like they see how much I can do. He said, I'm going to be real honest with you. If they told you how great you are, you would actually realize it, believe it, and you would either take over or you would leave. That's why they're not telling you how great you are. You have to understand how great you are. And I will never forget that. That has been with me for the past 15 years.
Wow, I love that. Oh, kudos. I
Yeah,
love that, man. There's so
that
many
was a
things you
great
can
one.
learn. Yes. I mean, man, shout out to all those awesome leaders. And again, even the worst lead, you can learn so many things from like those good and bad experiences. So thank you so much. And this one, again, my heart has been so much for like the Gen Zers out there. The last episode, I was blessed with the opportunity to interview one and get their perspective. But what advice would you give to a seasoned leader, like so the generation of the now, in supporting our Gen Z, our younger leaders as they are coming into their organizations and so on? Because again, I'm all about building bridges, and you see this high turnover rate. Studies have shown that Gen Zers are actually navigating a lot more workplace abuse, workplace bullying, and they're just navigating these unfortunate experiences in the workplace because of their age. So they're navigating ageism in a totally different way. But what kind of advice would you give to a seasoned leader? And let's add, like, what kind of advice would you give to a Gen Z if they're going into an organization or a company?
To a seasoned leader, I would say listen, just listen and be open to learning, be curious. It does not take away from your power if you change the way that you think. It's like the government, right? If we are going into war and there's a strategy put in place, and we have this plan for the strategy of how we're going to deal with that with our troops. Once the intel changes, we change the strategy. If you as a leader want to win the war, to be the best organization that's out there, get new intel from the Gen Zers. They're smart. They're all about energy, but you've got to listen. And it doesn't take anything from you to listen and learn something new. To the Gen Zers, listen, I'm taking my hat off to y'all because I'm learning from y'all all the time. I'm living with one every day. And I will say, have some patience, give grace to others, but also give grace to yourself.
Listen, isn't this is why she's amazing. This is why I just she's amazing. Because that's so good. That's so good. I love the war analogy because you're right. Change the intel, You're amazing.
And
Yeah. So
so are
as far as
you.
like so what do you have going on? I know people are going to want to connect with you. So where do people connect with you if they want to get this support, trauma informed, EQ, EI, all this good stuff? How can they connect with you?
I'm all over social media with the same handle. It's I am Ms. Word, IAMMZWORD. You can find me all over social media, or you can find me on my website, awordandcompany.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Aleasa Word. I'm there, and I'm kind of everywhere you want to be, and you're everywhere I want to be as well. So, you definitely can find me out there. I do have a lot of things going on. I got a couple of books on Amazon that I've written. Had a book that came out this year called Calm Your Storm, and it's 30 days of good thoughts and affirmations during anxious times. And we are living in anxious times right now. So that's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Walmart. I'm working on a couple other books right now, and doing a bunch of diversity and equity and inclusion work, as well as some stuff in the EQ space, and trying to get people practicing more with regards to their EQ, because it's not a destination, it's a journey.
Yes, yes, I love it. You say books with an S. Yeah, I have some great ideas. So, we've been talking. So, you see us together soon, So, but I so appreciate you, Lisa, for taking your time and, connecting with me. I just appreciate all your knowledge, your wisdom. You are amazing. And, I'm going to add all that information in the show notes. So make sure that you all grab that information in the show notes. Make sure you leave a review. Share this to a leader that needs this information, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And make sure you follow this amazing woman on social media and so on. So appreciate you guys tuning in. And I always say individuals don't typically quit the organization, they typically quit the leader. And that's why you need leadership development. And that's why you need to bring up that EQ. All right. You guys be amazing, be great. And I will catch you guys next time. Ta ta.